mind-melting drugs, truth serums, UFOs, and contacting former Nazis for help with unethical experiments. These are the 50 most insane and disturbing CIA facts you never knew. Number 50. The CIA Assassination Manual, drafted in 1952, states, "The most efficient accident in simple assassination is a fall of 75 feet or more onto a hard surface." Number 49. A man introduced to this treatment fell from room 1018A. His name was Frank Olson, and he's become one of the most talked about names in modern American history. What happened to him and what he did for the CIA is arguably the CIA's biggest secret, so we'll talk a lot about it today. Olson was a scientist who was part of secret mind control experiments. Days before his death, he told his wife, "I've made a terrible mistake." What that mistake was has been talked about for decades. What was his terrible mistake? That night, Olson had been sharing a room with CIA agent Robert Lashbrook. After the fall, Lashbrook looked out of the broken window of his and Olson's room, but instead of rushing down to check on Olson, he stayed in the bathroom, sitting on the toilet with his head in his hands. When the cops and Pastore entered the room and found him like that, the phone rang, and Lashbrook asked, "Can I answer that?" Lashbrook told him it was a bad connection, and he put the receiver down. Later, Pastore asked the hotel phone operator if any calls had been made from that room before he and the cops got there. These were the days when operators had to take names and put people through. She said yes, a call had been made, which was listed as from Dr. Harold Abramson, calling from South Oaks Hospital on Long Island. She stayed on the line to eavesdrop. One man said, "Well, he's gone." The other said, "Well, that's too bad." Lashbrook denied it, but why would she have lied? Number 48. Frank Olson was a very clever bacteriologist who became a biological warfare scientist. His official job was in the Special Operations Division, or SOD, at Fort Detrick, which was where the U.S. biological weapons program was being developed. Olson got in deep, more so than other scientists. He knew the CIA's biggest secrets, and he had a conscience, which was something not really required in American intelligence. Olson saw thousands of animals being killed by the chemicals he and his team invented, chemicals one day to be used on humans. Olson's son Eric once said he'd come to work in the morning and see piles of dead monkeys. Olson had a heart. He didn't like seeing what was later reported as the deaths of thousands upon thousands of sheep, cows, goats, horses, rabbits, pigs, guinea pigs, and monkeys, at least 2,000 rhesus monkeys. Lashbrook and Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Ruitt of the Army Chemical Corps had been with him before he died. Ruitt was Olson's supervisor at the SOD. A name you really shouldn't forget is that of the now infamous CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb. Not just a chemist, but a master spy and assassination expert. Number 47. Olson was invited to a retreat to take place on Wednesday, the 18th of November 1953 at a cabin on Deep Creek Lake in Maryland. Olson was one of 5 Army scientists from the Special Operations Division of the Chemical Corps that turned up on the day. Also at the meeting were 4 CIA scientists who were part of Operation MKUltra, which you'll understand soon. As evening approached on the second day, a bottle of Cointreau was produced and glasses were poured. Olson drank, as did the others. His drink and all but 2 other men had been spiked with lysergic acid dithylamide, LSD, an extremely potent hallucinogen that can be derived from the ergot fungi. The CIA was interested in it as a truth potion or a mind-wiping, mind-destroying drug. Number 46. The CIA led virtually thousands of operations during the Cold War years, some of them quite ridiculous sounding. One was Operation Scatole. Scatole is the compound found in poop. It stinks. That's why the operatives like to call it Operation Stinky. The scientists were asked to create the foulest substance they could, so they started to put together a chemical concoction. This was just to make enemies smell bad. Spray a civil rights leader with Scatole and he might not go through with his speech that day. It could be useful if you could stink a place out. Evidence shows one plan was to spray it on Black Panther newspapers to disrupt distribution. Number 45. Many of the people who ended up working for the CIA had, during the war, been employed by the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS. One of them was Boris Pash, who'd been a Hollywood high school teacher before the war. At the end of the war, he was part of a team charged with investigating the so-called father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, to find out if he was a Soviet spy. He wasn't, but Pash didn't stop there. He worked with the CIA post-war on a program called PB-7. This was an operation handling what the CIA called wet affairs, which meant things such as kidnappings and assassinations. Wet because they were often bloody. Pash also worked for the creepy-sounding Health Alteration Committee, a euphemism for murder or maiming. The committee existed from 1952 to 1968. During that time, one of their operations was to dose a high-ranking politician in the Philippines with LSD. Another operation was to get a fancy handkerchief to the Iraqi leader Abel Akarim Qasem, who came to power after the Iraqi monarchy was overthrown. The SOD had created a substance so that as soon as anyone used that handkerchief, they would die. Number 44. At the end of the war, Camp Dietrich scientists worked on a new poison under Dr. Hermann Sommer. He had his scientists collect paralytic shellfish poison as much as they could get. They worked with a herpes-like virus and a botulinum toxin that could be sprayed into someone's face to cause paralysis and death. The documents show they'd even worked with substances that could induce cancer through covert means. Documents show at one point a former FBI agent named Robert Mayhew was given several capsules, each containing a deadly dose of botulism. The agent passed them on to mafia kingpin John Handsome Johnny Rossellini. The CIA often used gangsters to do their hits for them. Sometimes the gangsters were then allowed to go on with their business, which was filling America's streets and slums with heroin. Investigations showed the CIA tested some of those products in Haiti and Guyana because, as a former SOD researcher explained, there were no laws or rules pertaining to what we were doing. He added the people we used in these experiments were of no consequence to anyone. Families, relatives were no problem. Number 43. In Berlin, some terrible things happened. Frank Olson made trips to Germany where suspected former Nazis or real former Nazis were interrogated at safe houses. It didn't sit well with Olson. He was there when they interrogated the so-called expendables, whose interviews were called terminal. They had a suspected Soviet agent in a Berlin safe house and gave him an unknown substance. The now declassified documents read, "Examination at redacted clinic identified sickness caused partial dissolution of brain tissues. Now redacted husband redacted is developing similar symptoms." Number 42. Olson was never right after being spiked with LSD. He went home and told his wife Alice that he'd made a terrible mistake. He was going to quit his job, but his colleagues believed he was having a breakdown. His wife didn't think that, though. Were his colleagues telling the truth, or did they have ulterior motives? His boss, Ruitt, said he would take Olson to see a professional, who just so happened to be the LSD doctor Abramson. They took him to New York, and you know what happened there. Interestingly, the last time Frank Olson ate with his wife, he pushed the food away and said it was poisoned. You'll know why later. Abramson suggested Olson be sent to Chestnut Lodge, an insane asylum in Maryland nicknamed the House of Horrors and Psychoville. Residents who lived nearby said they sometimes heard screaming from the hospital. Little did they know it was a CIA hospital where medical experiments happened. Olson was due to go there when he and Lashbrook and Ruitt checked into the Statler Hotel. Number 41. The mind experiments happened under different operations, and each of these operations had sub-operations. The larger ones were Project Bluebird, Project Artichoke, MK Naomi, and the well-known one MK Ultra. A document that the CIA didn't manage to destroy explained the material, drugs, could potentially aid in discrediting individuals, eliciting information, and implementing suggestions and other forms of mental control. Sometimes it was merely about disruption. One CIA document states that there was a plan to slip 90 milligrams of LSD into the president of the Philippines' drink right before he made a speech to his country. Number 40. On January 8, 1953, a 42-year-old professional tennis player named Harold Blower was depressed. So depressed, he was at a psychiatric facility in New York. He checked himself in. But once there, things got much worse. He became psychotic. His family had no idea what had happened. This hospital, New York's Bellevue Hospital, had signed a contract with the SOD so the latter could do a psychological investigation of potential chemical warfare agents on humans. Blower was given LSD on 4 occasions. He hated it. It scared him. The day before he was to be released, they injected him a 5th time with a mescaline derivative codenamed EA-1298. Documents show it took considerable persuasion to get him to agree to it. He'd been told these drugs would help him, not that they were chemical warfare agents. After that injection, he dropped down dead. A woman in another ward was injected too. She later said, "I've been in hell. Why did they put me in hell?" Number 39. Hellish events happened in Canada too. In Montreal, Dr. Ewan Cameron was working with CIA money through one of the CIA's many front businesses. Cameron had thought for a long time that the human brain could be wiped and rewritten, that you could effectively change a person's personality, make a depressed person happy. For the CIA, the potential was making a good person a killer or rewriting the brain of an assassin. Cameron would put his psychiatric patients into an induced coma and then play tapes on a loop to them for days, weeks, or months. He called this de-patterning. When they came out of it, he sometimes gave them a powerful electroconvulsive shock. He also administered potent drugs such as amphetamines or LSD. Patients did not give their consent to this. Many of them had lifelong serious mental health issues. One of his many notes he made states, although the patient was prepared by both prolonged sensory isolation, 35 days, and by repeated de-patterning, and although she received 101 days of positive driving, no favorable results were obtained. Number 38. A Manhattan attorney that investigated the Olson case once told a newspaper there was motive to kill him. He knew the deepest, darkest secrets of the Cold War. Would the American government kill an American citizen who was a scientist who was working for the CIA and the Army if they thought he was a security risk? There are people who say definitely. Documents from Operation Bluebird show the CIA wanted to find a way to make people do things they wouldn't usually do. One document written by the CIA boss Allen Dulles to Bluebird project leader Sheffield Edwards asks, "Can we create by post-hypnotic control an action contrary to a person's basic moral principles? Could we seize a subject by post-hypnotic control and have him crash an airplane, wreck a train, etc.?" This was an eyes-only project, meaning very top secret. Under Bluebird, they also created what they said was a truth drug. It seems some of these drugs weren't very safe. After one experiment, the Bluebird physician wrote, "Subject's respiration became labored and painful. Subject became completely irrational and disoriented, and ultimately subject lost all ability to stand or walk and was carried in a semi-conscious condition to his bedroom." Number 37. Allen Dulles was later asked, "Can a person under hypnosis commit an act against his religious or moral training or upbringing?" Dulles replied, "Yes, anything could be done by a person under hypnosis, including murder." It gets worse. Number 36. CIA contractor and Narcotics Bureau agent George Hunter White spiked many people with LSD. He once said about the CIA, "Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" Under Operation Midnight Climax, he set up a safe house in San Francisco where he paid prostitutes to bring men back to a room. The room had a double mirror. The men were spiked with LSD and the CIA observed, sometimes with the prostitute using various verbal cues. Number 35. When such experiments were discovered, it was all over U.S. television. Then, for years after, people sued the government. Many said they'd been a patient in a hospital and had been given this drug. Some said they'd met a man in a bar one night and then suddenly gone mad, after which they ended up in a mental hospital for years. White was often the man they'd met that fateful night. He spiked people just for fun sometimes. After the investigations, it was stated no one knows where they, the human test subjects, are now or what effects they might have suffered. We'll tell you some stories later about this. Number 34. White was a graduate of Camp X in Ontario, Canada. Its students sometimes referred to Camp X as the School of Mayhem and Murder. It was basically a paramilitary school where students learned covert action and assassination techniques. The camp's motto was "Kill or be killed." Many shady names were under contract with the CIA. One was Pierre Lafitte, said to be a prolific hitman who worked under Project Artichoke and MKUltra. Lafitte's name pops up many times in investigations, but he is a bit of a mystery. He was thought to be the CIA's top assassin, related to the Corsican Mafia, whose path crossed with both Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, according to investigative journalist H.P. Albarelli. You'll hear more about him later. Number 33. The CIA worked with the magician John Mulholland. One of the things he did was teach sleight of hand so CIA agents could slip things in people's drinks, what CIA documents described as delivery mechanisms. He also worked with the CIA on UFOs. Number 32. While UFOs might seem outlandish, documents show that Dr. H. Marshall Chadwell, CIA Chief of Scientific Intelligence, stated in the 1950s, unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known types of aerial vehicles. In 1952, Chadwell warned that a fair share of the U.S. population is mentally conditioned to the acceptance of the incredible. He said if the Soviets wanted, they could fake a UFO flying over the U.S. and everyone would believe it. Number 31. Documents show that Gottlieb asked Mulholland to investigate the UFO sightings. He did just that at the famous Kelly Hopkinsville encounter in 1955, in which 5 adults and 7 children at a farm swore they saw aliens and fought them off with guns. Number 30. On February 19, 1954, under Project Artichoke, the CIA's behavioral research specialist, Morse Allen put his secretary into a deep trance. As she was sleeping, he hypnotized another secretary and told her if she could not wake her friend up, her rage would be so great that she would not hesitate to kill. He then placed a pistol nearby, although the secretary had no idea it wasn't loaded. Even though she'd earlier said guns scared her, in her hypnotized state she ran to the gun, picked it up and tried to shoot her sleeping colleague. Success! He'd controlled them. Both women later said they remembered nothing of the ordeal. The CIA has always said it couldn't control people like that, but some of the documents seem to state otherwise. Number 29. Allen Dulles once told Chief of Research Staff Paul Gaynor that mind control experiments show promising results. Number 28. Before he got involved with MKUltra and Project Artichoke, Gaynor had run his own operation in which he tried to find hidden homosexuals in the U.S. government. One man, State Department employee John C. Montgomery, died as a result of Gaynor's threat to expose him. Number 27. Gaynor wanted to set up a fake left-wing organization, and if any illegal immigrants joined it, he would arrest them and use them for drug experiments. He also wanted to use 4,000 military personnel who were serving court-martial sentences. Number 26. At one point, Gaynor debated with Allen if you could really make a person kill someone. Allen shot back that there have already been a number of successful tests with redacted that showed religious and moral inhibitions were not problematic. Allen added that in one instance, an agency employee had been forced to commit harm to fellow employees on a number of occasions. Number 25. As we said, all this was investigated and it was a huge story at the time. In one investigation, George White's date book was used as evidence. It showed he dosed many people with LSD in 1953 and 1954 just to see what would happen. One woman was drugged at a dinner party and had to be hospitalized. Another woman, one of White's wife's friends, was so messed up that she was sent to a mental institution and received psychiatric care for 35 years. An actress that lived in White's apartment block was spiked and ran up to the roof where she had to be talked down. Number 24. Documents show that Dr. Lorette Bender, working with Dr. Abramson, tested LSD on 14 schizophrenic children aged between 6 and 11 with 100 milligrams of LSD daily for 6 weeks. If you know LSD, you know how bad that is. Dr. Alfred M. Friedman, also working in tandem with CIA agents, did tests on 12 autistic schizophrenic children who were attending day school. These may have been therapeutic in nature, but they were still in violation of those children's human rights. Their parents weren't informed, and the experiments were very dangerous, considering their mental issues. This next one is worse. Number 23. In 1954, an MKUltra document discusses the possibility of causing cancer in people. It says, if this hydrocarbon can be produced in a lab by chemical transformation of normal constituents of the human organism, it is possible that the substance may arise in the body through a process of abnormal metabolism and initiate cancer. Number 22. Under the sub-project called the Bullpen Project, Dr. Carl C. Pfeiffer wanted to make people psychotic, not control them. Just make them utterly crazy, break them. He tested this at the Atlanta Penitentiary, later writing that hallucinations lasted for 3 days characterized by repeated waves of depersonalization. The prisoners had no idea what they were getting into, only that they'd get some extra money. Don't forget that he said 3 days. Number 21. One of them was Marvin Williams. He later testified that tests went on for weeks. We kept getting handed a glass of what looked like water. Drink it, they said, and blam! The roof exploded. Crazy things happened. I mean, really crazy. Like not real, but happening. It was like I was in a jungle someplace with wild animals all around me. All these crazy beasts trying to kill me. Never again, man. Never again. In court, Gottlieb later admitted that this was an ultra-sensitive project involving psychotic states. He added, "We learned a lot from the Atlanta experiments," explaining that they knew how disturbed they could make someone. Number 20. In another prison experiment, Dr. Harris Isbell worked with the CIA with mostly black prisoners. While white prisoners did get dosed with LSD, including the infamous criminal Whitey Bulger, black prisoners were used more often. Bulger, by the way, did not have a history of violence before he was dosed with LSD for weeks on end, which he said drove him half mad. Isbell worked at the Federal Narcotics Prison Farm, where men were sent to get off drugs, mainly heroin. These were desperate men who'd been locked up in Harry Anslinger's race-driven war on drugs. But at the prison, they were offered heroin if they took part in experiments, so they not only lost their minds, but their habits returned. One prisoner, Edward M. Flowers, explained, "My whole reason for going into the program was to get drugs." We still haven't got to the why we think Olson was killed. We'll come to that soon, but first let's have a deeper look at the CIA's 1952 assassination manual. Number 19. Former SOD scientist Dr. Gerald Yonitz later said, "The CIA was always looking for ways to kill people or to make them sick. They had various categories ranging from making someone slightly sick to terminally ill. On the lethal front, they categorized substances ranging from slow kill to quick kill and a good many in between." He added, "We had periodic meetings with the CIA to discuss the how-tos of killing people. Frank Olson was there. Operation PB Success is a good example. This was to overthrow a democratically elected president, something the CIA was very good at. The president, Jacobo Arbenz Guzman of Guatemala, was one of the more cherished men in the history of Guatemalan democracy, a supporter of the poor, which was a little too commie for the US government of the 1950s. His name was on what the CIA said was a disposal list. 58 Guatemalans were on the list to be murdered by what the CIA said was their K teams, meaning kill teams. The CIA supported despots and dictators all over the world. Assassination was an important part of the job. Number 18. The CIA manual says the assassin's best bet is often killing a man with their bare hands, but the manual adds that very few are skillful enough to do it well. "You can almost always get away with strangling a man and making it look like something else," said the manual, which we're not sure is still in use today. There's a whole chapter on accidents. You already know what it said about falls. The manual states when successfully executed, it causes little excitement and is only casually investigated. If you're an older person watching this, you'll remember just how many people fell out of windows in the 50s and 60s. When Republican Karl Mundt was asked back then who was a communist agent, he joked, "We'll count them as they fall out of the windows." The manual says a killer dose of drugs is always a good option. It adds an overdose of morphine administered as a sedative, will cause death without disturbance, and is difficult to detect. It says if they drink a lot, wait for them to pass out first. The CIA was Breaking Bad. As for blunt weapons, the manual says they're best used when the assassin has some anatomical knowledge. The main advantage of blunt weapons, it states, is their universal availability. It explains a hammer may be picked up anywhere in the world. Was it really necessary to say that to agents? The manual explains blows should be directed to the temple, the area just below and behind the ear, and the lower rear portion of the skull. If that fails, Chapter 4 suggests severing the spinal cord with an edge weapon, a knife, or severing both jugulars and the carotid blood vessels on both sides of the windpipe. Number 17. One journalist who spent a long time investigating the CIA's Cold War years has said one of the most formidable assassins was Lafitte. In September 1977, the New York Times called Lafitte a special employee of the Narcotics Bureau. He was much more than that. It was Lafitte who helped White with those safe houses when people were tortured or recorded after being spiked with LSD by prostitutes. One safe house, a $60 a month studio at 105 West 13th Street in New York, was so decked out with surveillance equipment that one former agent joked if you spilled a drink, you'd get electrocuted. Lafitte was called a Jekyll Hyde character. He could be a killer, he could work with police, and he could become a gangster rubbing shoulders with mafia bosses. Number 16. Talking about assassinations, the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps, Army CIC, a precursor to the CIA, hired the Nazi torturer Klaus Barbie when the French were looking for him. He got the name the Butcher of Lyon since he did some terrifying things to French resistance fighters. He also had a lot of intel, so the US sent him through a rat line to Bolivia where he ended up torturing again for dictators that the US had helped install. But he wasn't the only Nazi helping the CIA. During Operation Bloodstone, many of Barbie's previous Nazi colleagues were also put on the CIA payroll. These Nazis were recruited to deal with the rising influence of communism within Europe through techniques such as psychological warfare, subversion, sabotage, and miscellaneous operations such as assassination, target capture, and the rescue of Allied airmen. Number 15. It's well known the agency worked with the Corsican Mafia and turned a blind eye to heroin trafficking into the US in exchange for the gangsters helping the CIA keep French communists under control. The historian William McCoy said the CIA was involved with trafficking on 3 levels. 1. It allied with the traffickers. 2. It helped known traffickers to evade the law. And 3. In his own words, active engagement in the transport of opium and heroin. He added it's ironic, to say the least, that America's heroin plague is of its own making. The agency is accused of helping Golden Triangle drug traffickers when the CIA was bombing the hell out of Laos, a war crime no less. The agency used its own front organization, Air America, to transport heroin. It didn't handle the heroin but provided the transport. DEA agents have even said this. Some investigators have said that CIA Director George H.W. Bush and then Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton were also involved in drugs. This hasn't been proven, but a lot of people have said it. Intellectual heavyweight Christopher Hitchens went to Oxford with Clinton and later wrote in his autobiography that he thought Clinton was CIA. Number 14. Journalist Gary Webb became famous when he investigated the story of the CIA being involved with drug trafficking undertaken by the right-wing rebel group it was backing in Nicaragua, the Contras. The CIA trained and supplied the Contras as they committed heinous human rights abuses, including many kidnappings and murders. Webb said he discovered that the CIA was helping the Contras to traffic cocaine to the U.S., which led to the crack cocaine epidemic. The beginning of his first article of a series said for the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions of drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA has always denied this, and other journalists have questioned its veracity. It's never been proven in a court of law. Still, there is no doubt at all that the CIA over the decades has had a hand in drug trafficking in some way, just as drugs at home were a moral panic. Gary Webb died in 2004. His death, many people thought, was suspicious. Number 13. In the early 1950s, the CIA, then the CIC, wanted to get a hold of the Nazi anthrax expert Dr. Walter B. Schreiber. He testified at the Nuremberg trials after being taken prisoner by the Soviets. Even though he gave evidence, he was accused of conducting gruesome medical experiments at the Auschwitz camp. He escaped the Soviets and in 1949 ended up working for the CIC. In 1951, 3 scientists from Camp Detrick traveled from the US to meet him and other Nazi scientists. One of the US team was Frank Olson. Number 12. Olson also traveled to Vietnam a few times. In Saigon, the CIA station chief was William Colby. Colby helped launch what's sometimes called the biggest assassination program in CIA history. That was the Phoenix program, which lasted from 1967 to 1972. It targeted not Vietnamese soldiers but regular civilians. Reports state that 81,740 people suspected of Viet Cong membership were neutralized. Many were brutally tortured. 26,369 were killed. The torture was frankly unbelievable. It often involved doing sexual things to men and women using various objects, even eels and snakes. A former military officer who was a witness wrote that one favorite was the insertion of the 6-inch dowel into the canal of one of my detainees' ears and the tapping through the brain until dead. That's not surprising when you hear this next one. Number 11. One man they couldn't kill was the Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Not that they didn't try. Some of the methods were the brainchild of Olson and his team at the SOD. Reports state that they produced an aerosol spray that produces reactions similar to LSD. Another report states that the CIA thought about hitting Castro, his son, and Che Guevara with what the report says were psychic energizers to make the men go insane and possibly hurt themselves. The CIA also thought about someone getting a box of cigars to Castro loaded with a killer toxin. The head of the Cuban task force, Jake Esterline, later admitted that they couldn't find anyone trustworthy enough to do the job. The CIA, along with the SOD, considered using thallium salts on Castro, a substance women use to get rid of body hair. The CIA's plan was to make Castro's famous beard fall out and therefore emasculate him in front of his people. The SOD worked very hard to get the concoction right, with investigators saying many dogs, cats, monkeys, and sheep lost their hair in the process. Former SOD scientist Gerald Yonitz later admitted it was a pretty silly project. He said the animals not only lost their hair, but the stuff also sometimes caused paralysis, brain damage, and death. The team wrote this down as unanticipated benefits. The CIA's plan to assassinate Castro also included what it called the gambling syndicate phase, which meant hiring the mafia again. Cuba had a lot of casinos and lots of mafia, but this didn't succeed. Even though Pierre Lafitte was involved again, John Maple Spirito, a Corsican mafia guy and a CIA spy, were also considered. After the Bay of Pigs fiasco, when the U.S. used Cuban exiles in an attempted land invasion of Cuba, prisoners were taken. Castro said he'd hand some back, so the CIA prepared to give him a skin diving suit in good faith. Sidney Gottlieb later admitted that the suit was heavily dusted inside with the Madura foot fungus. This fungus could produce horrible boils on the skin and end with amputation, just to make sure the CIA put tuberculosis bacteria in the breathing part. The suit thing never went through, nor did the plan to use exploding seashells or a midget submarine loaded with bombs. The CIA hated Castro so much they even conceived a false flag operation called Operation Northwoods, in which they'd commit a violent act of terrorism against the American people and blame it on Cuba. If that happened, the public would support going to war with Cuba. President Kennedy, not the CIA's favorite person, rejected it. Number 10. Have you heard of the 1962 book Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess? It's about an out-of-control youth that gets his brain fried after committing crimes. The authorities make him watch terrifyingly violent movies to condition his brain to be averse to violence. In real life, a Navy staff psychologist named Lieutenant Commander Thomas Narut had actually done work related to this. He wrote a paper asking if violent images and videos were played to men who were naturally predisposed to violence, would they become violent? He wanted to know if you could condition a man to maim or kill. He said his experiments showed passive-aggressive personalities worked best. He said he proved that in experiments at the Naval Neuropsychiatric Laboratory Center in San Diego. The films used in the experiments were extremely violent. He also used movies that dehumanized the enemy. But after a British journalist wrote an article about this in 1975 for the Times newspaper in England, so many US journalists contacted Narut that he suddenly went quiet. The New York Times picked up the story and, citing the Times, said Narut sometimes used convicted murderers from military prisons. Still, that was pretty much the last thing anyone heard of the Clockwork Orange experiments. Okay, now for something very important. Number 9. On August 16, 1951, at a village in France called Pont-Saint-Esprit, something incredibly strange happened, arguably one of the strangest things that's happened in human history. It was a quiet day, a normal day in the town, but then people suddenly started walking around babbling to themselves. Lots of people. One man then started running, screaming as if wiping invisible bees from his body. People were taken to Dr. Janvieux. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. People were cracking up in front of him, screaming, fighting monsters that weren't there. His assistants had to hold them down. A local politician took off all his clothes and danced in the town square, totally naked. One man screamed, "My belly is full of snails. They're burning me to death. I am in the water." People were falling in the street, shouting at hallucinations. An 11-year-old boy tried to strangle his mom. People had to be tied down, but they ripped off the binds. Scores of people went to the doctor's office, so many that they had to be put in a barn. One person shouted, "I am now sending out radio messages everywhere. Get me an X-ray and you can see." Another delirious person screamed, "Tigers are going to eat us all. They're going to rip us to pieces." She pointed to the ceiling. She cried out, "Blood is dripping down on everything. Can't you stop the bleeding?" Pets were also dropping dead. Cats, dogs just went crazy and died on the spot. One guy chewed so hard on the straitjacket they put him in that his teeth fell out on the floor. A 12-year-old ran through town screaming that he'd been to the cemetery and the dead had risen from the graves. He shouted, "They're coming to eat us alive." He told people this who were walking around on all fours, now thinking that they were animals. It was described as hell on earth, and it went on for 3 days. A French journalist wrote, "Doctors are beside themselves with work. The rumors are wild and contradictory. Fear hangs over the town everywhere. No one knows when it'll end." Hundreds of people had gone totally mad. Some jumped out of windows running from something, breaking bones as they landed. 32 were taken to the insane asylum. Some stayed there for many years. They totally broke down. 3 men and 1 woman died from whatever they'd accidentally ingested. Many years later, a former postman named Léon Arminier said he would rather die than experience that again. He told the BBC, "It was terrible. I had the sensation of shrinking, and the fire and the serpents coiling around my arms." The New York Times called it a medical mystery. Nothing like this had ever happened in modern times, although it was similar to those dancing manias in the Middle Ages, where whole towns just danced, sometimes dancing themselves to death. So the theory was that this was caused by bread, ergot in the bread, which, as you know, LSD can be derived from. That was the conclusion. It was the ergot in the food that did it, the end. But not for people who looked a little harder. What happened in that town is exactly what the CIA had been working on, the exact same time they were doing it to foreign prisoners and American citizens. Imagine if the CIA had just visited that small town. No way that happened, you're thinking. Number 8. At the time of the French mass madness, the CIA was conducting experiments under MK Naomi. Part of this operation was to come up with sprays that could fall down like a mist and poison people. Or could they poison, say, the water supply? A CIA consultant and Harvard scientist had thought a lot about this. His name was Henry K. Beecher. He did a lot of work with the CIA in Germany relating to terrifying drug experiments by interrogators nicknamed Rough Boys. It's ironic he also wrote about medical ethics. And guess what? In 1951, Beecher met with Frank Olson and Vincent Ruitt. This is according to an investigative journalist who obtained the records from the U.S. National Archives. The journalist said they were working on something called Project Span. One of the places they met was a village and its name was Pont Saint-Esprit. The file began, Re Pont Saint-Esprit, and F. Olsen files. SO Span France operation file. Inconclusive Olsen. Intel files. Hand carry to Berlin. Tell him to see to it that these are buried. Using Freedom of Information legislation, the same journalist found a CIA report from 1954. It says an agent reported a conversation with a representative of the Sandoz Chemical Company in Switzerland. That's where all the LSD was made back then. It's not far from Pont Saint-Esprit. The document shows the agent had some drinks with the Sandoz representative, and he told the agent the Pont Saint-Esprit secret is that it wasn't the bread at all, it was not the grain ergot. Number 7. Many critics of the theory say this couldn't have happened since the effects of LSD don't last that long. But as you know, the CIA and the SOD had worked on potions that were way stronger than LSD. The records show the CIA worked with many different hallucinogens, including ibogaine from Africa, which can last a long time. The psychedelic Ganesha can last 24 hours and has the same terrifying effect for those unaware that they've been drugged. Also, DMT often lasts just 15 minutes, but when the Amazonians mix in other plants and change the structure to create the brew ayahuasca, it lasts for hours. CIA documents show they mix drugs together all the time, drugs found in all 4 corners of the world. Beecher wrote a paper saying it would be possible to poison an entire town with LSD. He said it should not be a difficult trick to sink a small container of LSD near the main outlet of water storage reservoirs. He said this could excrete a steady flow of material over many hours or days. The whole point of this research was to see if the military could take out a town without necessarily killing anyone. We don't know what happened with any of this, but we do know Beecher met with many of the people you've heard about today, including a meeting with George White at the Statler Hotel. That investigative journalist uncovered a letter written by Beecher that mentions the Bedford safe house and also pharmacological lobotomies. A colleague of Beecher's, Dr. John M. von Felsinger, later admitted that they'd done a lot of human testing with drugs in Haiti. He said you could get away with pretty much anything there. In Operation Sea Spray, the CIA sprayed a biological weapon over the San Francisco Bay Area. No one died, but some people got severely ill. Number 6. After Beecher died, a poem he'd written was found. It went, "A shy little snail from Toulouse, who is normally quite the recluse, went out on the town and acted the clown, singing out LSD's my excuse." Number 5. Many people sued the government after the mind control experiments were discovered and made public by the news since they said they thought they'd been part of them. A U.S. Marshal named Wayne Ritchie was out in San Francisco one night and suddenly started feeling really weird. He then started hallucinating. He ran out onto the street and ended up holding up a bar. He was only given a suspended sentence, but spent the next few decades having terrible flashbacks of the night. He was in and out of mental hospitals suffering from anxiety and depression. Ritchie found out through George White's diaries that he'd spent a lot of time where White used to hang out and spike people. When he was 75 years old, Ritchie sued the CIA for $12 million. He lost, appealed, and lost again, but the courts expressed that it was possible that he'd been part of those experiments. As we say, many people came forward and said they'd also gone mad one day after being completely sane. Number 4. 20-year-old Stanley Glickman was driving in Paris in 1952. He was an up-and-coming artist at the time. He got into an argument with some American men, and his left-wing views didn't go over so well. So far, Glickman had only drunk coffee, but one of the men offered him a shot as a peace offering, telling Glickman with a smile on his face that he would perform miracles. Glickman drank it, and his life changed forever. He spent the next 2 weeks wandering around Paris, tripping, not knowing what was real. He later said he was in a state of madness, delusion, and terror. This just doesn't happen to people with no history of mental illness. He never got well again. He returned to the U.S., where he spent the next 25 years hardly leaving the house. He was treated by a psychiatrist, but he never found out what had happened to him. But he had an idea when one day his sister was watching the MKUltra trial news on TV. In 1985, he sued. The trial document reads, "Plaintiff Stanley Glickman brings his lawsuit against the defendant United States of America and against defendants Richard Helms and Sidney Gottlieb in their individual capacities and in their official capacities as former officials of the CIA." Glickman died without anyone ever being found guilty. His sister later said he didn't want one penny from the government. She explained he wanted the American people to know there was an agency that could act so arrogantly, so irresponsibly toward one of its citizens. He was terribly concerned that the story get out. Number 4. These experiments happened to many thousands of people all over the world. There are convincing theories that Charles Manson was a part of these experiments, but that is speculation. We know for sure that Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, was part of the CIA's mind control experiments, what The Atlantic called purposefully brutalizing psychological experiments. The professor doing the experiment, Henry A. Murray, had previously worked at the Office of Strategic Services, another precursor to the CIA, often working on experiments related to brainwashing. Number 3. Olson's family didn't know what Frank had gone through until the Rockefeller Commission investigated MKUltra in 1975. Prior to that, journalist Seymour Hersh had investigated and accused the CIA of being a domestic Gestapo. Eric Olson said he found out about his father being spiked by watching it on TV. No one had even bothered to tell the family. The family always believed that the CIA was responsible for their father's death. Eric even interviewed Ruitt and Lashbrook. He said Lashbrook was unbelievably nervous. The family later sued for wrongful death and received an out-of-court settlement of $1.25 million, reduced to $750,000 or about $3.9 million today. They also got a personal apology from President Gerald Ford and the then CIA Director William Colby. But they still knew something was being kept secret. Eric was sure his father had been pushed out of a window, but by whom and why? Was there more to this story than just their pop watching people getting tortured and killed in Vietnam and Germany? Number 2. Assistant Manhattan District Attorneys Stephen Sirocco and Daniel Bibb later investigated the case to once and for all get to the bottom of it. During their investigation, they discovered a White House identity sheet listing names and places related to Olson. One of the names was Pierre Lafitte, and number 11 on the sheet was the town of Pont-Saint-Esprit. They never could prove that Olson was murdered, but they thought it was likely the case. At one point in their case, they were contacted by 2 former CIA agents named Albert and Neil, fake names. They said Olson had indeed been involved with Project Span at Pont-Saint-Esprit, but the experiment had gone wrong. Someone had made a terrible mistake. The attorneys also found documents saying that before the Deep Creek Lake spiking of drinks, Dr. Abramson had written that its purpose was trapping Olson. But why did they want to trap him? Olson knew they were after him. He'd said too much, says one theory. Indeed, after witnessing torture in Germany, an army sergeant reported that Olson seemed deeply disturbed over what he had seen in CIA safe houses in Germany and displayed symptoms of not wanting to keep secret what he had witnessed. The CIA received that report. Deep Creek Lake then might have been to see if Olson would talk about what happened in either Germany or France when under the influence of LSD. Again, this is theory, not proven fact, but the evidence is compelling. If he had talked to outsiders about Pont-Saint-Esprit, the USA would have looked very, very bad. It was almost an act of war. The whole world would have condemned the US and rightly talked about breaching the Nuremberg Code. The US would have been said to be no better than the Nazis. The attorneys discovered that after Olson's visit to France, he had spoken out of line with several colleagues about the town. He opened his mouth in a place where you were not supposed to do that. The investigative journalist we mentioned before, H.P. Albarelli Jr., interviewed former SOD staff about Pont-Saint-Esprit. According to one interview, Pont-Saint-Esprit was mentioned in the same sentences as aerosol LSD and contaminating food sources. But Albert and Neil would not testify under their real names. That was way too dangerous. They supplied the information, that was enough. Albarelli Jr. confirmed that they were definitely ex-CIA, but they wouldn't testify. Number 1. The night Olson died, Lafitte was working undercover with one of his false names at, have a guess, the Statler Hotel. According to Albert and Neil, Spirito was also there. They'd been told to watch over Olson. According to Albert and Neil, the plan had been to take Olson to Chestnut Grove, which you'll remember was the CIA-sponsored mental health facility and home to many of their cruel experiments. They said Olson became unhinged that night. They attempted to move him from the room and get him in a car, but something went wrong, they said. Olson resisted, and in the ensuing struggle was pitched out of the window. So, was that what really happened? Like with so many CIA stories, you could say it seems likely, but despite all the circumstantial evidence, you still can't join all the dots with absolute certainty. If anything, the CIA is pretty good at its job. For our sake, let's just hope it's learned some ethics since those dark days. If not, you might wonder what is it up to today. Now you need to watch how they finally caught the Nazi butcher, or have a look at a real reason why Nazi officers fled to Argentina after World War II.